bring the drinks.
Okay, so let's talk about one of the common talking points that's publishing. What do you think are some of the good reasons to publish? What are some of the reasons not to publish, both having your games published by someone else or your company publishing games for someone else? Nate, you want to start?
Sure. Well, one of the benefits of being Warner Brothers is we're one of the chief suppliers of content to iTunes, period. Movies, TVs, and games. And so we have a great relationship with Apple. We're not in the publishing business per se of third-party games, but I think if we were, it'd be great to work with us. We had established a really great track record with Apple in terms of having quite a bit of featuring for our games, selections as both editor's choice and Game of the Weeks and other features as well. So I think if you can have an opportunity to work with somebody that has a great relationship with Apple or Android, that could be a big advantage for giving you direct access to one of those platforms and heightening your visibility with their editorial teams. I think another big advantage is it takes people, resources, and expertise to really do free-to-play games well. It's a lot more analytics and data-driven, and there's a lot of expertise both in game design and in execution of live services that are required to do it well, certainly to do it well over a long period of time. So if you don't have those capabilities as a smaller developer and you can work with a publisher to help do that, then I think it could be a big advantage. At that point, you need to basically make the decision of whether it's worth it from an economic standpoint.
So on the publishing side, I can't speak too details. I'm really a first-party developer, but what I've seen is that for a lot of publishing, it comes to making sure the goals of the developer and the publisher are aligned. And GREE does a very good job of this in the Asian market, where they have a lot of institutional knowledge about really what makes the game successful. They have lots of data to see what really keeps that momentum going long after the game launches. So in the States, especially with the iOS market and the Android market being the two predominant markets for game development, you want to partner yourself with someone who is an expertise in both, who have taken apps to the top free as well as the top grossing, so they can also share what they've learned with you. But I think what's really important at the end of the day is to make sure that your goals as a developer as well as your publisher are aligned together. Because as soon as that changes, it can really create a negative experience. Especially for a lot of the indie developers out there with not as big of a piggy bank as some of the larger publishers. That's really where you really make sure that your goals and what you want to do with the app really are aligned together.
I'm not a huge fan of working with publishers, frankly, so I'm going to buck the trend a little bit. I think that they serve their purpose in some cases. I think that if you really want to get into the Asian market, into Korea and China and Japan, working with a publisher might be one of the only ways to do that. Certainly China has huge barriers for independent developers. I think at the end of the day, if you're an indie developer, you should, and I was talking to somebody about this earlier this evening when I got here, Brian, somebody somewhere, I don't know where you're sitting, but we were actually talking, there he is. We were talking about, really your first game, you just shouldn't really expect to make any money at all. And if you expect that and you think a publisher is going to give you that, you're probably going to be disappointed in that. So you can use a publisher for that and try and align your goals with theirs. And maybe your goal is to learn about the market. Maybe they'll give you that opportunity if you think you're going to sign up with a publisher because you're going to make your millions because this publisher is going to get you discovered and move you along that path. You're probably fooling yourself, and you're going to have just as much luck making the most awesome game that you can and trying to work with a great PR team, figure out a way to get some sort of sponsorship so that you can actually do user acquisition on your own. You're going to learn more that way. So for me, working with publishers is really a double-edged sword. You're going to pay them. You're already paying Apple and you're already paying Google 30% of your money. How much more are you going to have to give a publisher for them to help get you where you want to be? They may or may not share their expertise with you. Hopefully you'll have a great relationship with them and they will. But you're going to have to really, really spend a lot of your time negotiating that relationship. And that's going to mean that you're going to spend less time making your game. So, think about what your goals are. Make sure that you're talking really clearly with your publisher. Make sure that the deal you make with the publisher makes sense for you, because you don't want to give up control of your game. That's probably why you went indie in the first place. There's pluses and minuses to it, but just make sure you understand what you're getting into. It's not always going to be the best experience for everybody.
Okay, something, Caryl, you brought up leads into this next question. What are some of the trends internationally that we should be looking at here from the U.S.? Is it, a lot of talk lately about messaging apps, things like that. What are some other things that we should think about when planning to go global?
So yeah, I mean, you alluded to it really quickly, which is the messaging apps, right? I mean, I'm not sure if everyone is aware, but if you guys are not, it's something to definitely pay attention to. We do, as game companies, pay very close attention to it. So the big messaging apps like Kakao in Korea, WeChat in China, Line in Japan. WhatsApp is kind of outside of those regions, but growing very well in the rest of the world. So, for us as game developers and publishers, we think all the time, how do we get our games into onto people's devices and into their hands and discover our games. So it's very interesting because, I mean, you have entrenched players like Facebook who've been dominant for a little bit, but then, Facebook was not dominant, right, like 5 years ago. So like, there's always going to be these disruptive things that you have to monitor very closely as any app developer, whether you're a game app developer or just a normal app developer. So for us, it's very interesting for us to watch very closely. It's interesting that it's taking some really good share away from very entrenched players, and it's another mechanism for users to communicate. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really like users are communicating with each other, and they're just finding different ways to do it that is either cheaper or more fun or more social. And I guess based on history, we've seen some other like Asian countries like Japan, they're actually leading indicators of what happens in the future. So, as these things are gaining traction in other countries, like Asia, for example, it's sometimes like if we learn from history, it's something we should monitor very closely to predict the future.
Any other things internationally besides messaging apps we should think about?
So, again, with the Asian market, what we're seeing is, and again, we're not a studio, we're just working with the developers that are trying to get more distribution out there into the Asian market, where typically they've been in Europe and they've been in the US. We're finding that it's really good to align yourself with the hardware makers that have these app stores. So especially in China, where the distribution is really going through things, these app stores like Huawei or ZTE, and so that's something you're going to want to look for if you're moving into that market. It's definitely where a publishing house comes in well if you're going to take an English kind of app and you want to translate and you want to kind of push into those markets. But I've also seen indie developers that have grown over the years. To take, for example, Handy Games. They're out of Germany, and they started as a small house, and they're huge now, and they're all over the place. Their guys are traveling internationally, and they're making these deals in Asia themselves. So it's not that you have to go with a publishing house, but definitely if you're going to go into Asia and you don't have a really big budget, you might want to think about going to hardware manufacturers, checking out what their app stores are, and getting more involved there. I know here in the US, you've got Google and you've got the Samsung App Store. Google Store, that's that Google Play is the place. Amazon's there as well. And then you've got Samsung App Stores trying to be something. It's not really there yet. But in Asia, it's different. And especially in China, it's different. So don't rule out the app stores over there.
And the only small thing I'd like to add is that for a lot of the small indie guys, like I would say that be very cautious of when you think about international, because each region has their own personality, has their own sort of culture, and you just can't assume that whatever works for you in that your home region will work in that international region. Case in example, Puzzles and Dragons is making $100 million in Asia. They're not doing that here for whatever reason. World of Tanks, which is a very popular MMO, it's making all of its money, well, not all of it, but a large portion of that money from Russia, which most people don't really know. So I was thinking about, in terms of expanding internationally, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, and to be very sort of respectful of their cultural differences to what they like, and really adopted that. So again, focus is really key.
Great. Let's switch topics a little bit. Let's talk about the user acquisition. The big thing lately has been paid installs, whatever you want to call it. But most big studios do it, but that's also driving the price up considerably. Is it something that is now out of reach of the small guys? Is it purely the playground of the big developer who can drop hundreds of thousands of dollars on a title launch?
Try this one. I think I think that you're right in a lot of ways. I think that it is becoming, user acquisition is becoming a tool that larger developers and publishing houses that have a lot of access to. But I also think that there is opportunity. There are so many companies out there that are trying to do user acquisition, and if you find the right one that blends in the same way that you want to pick the right countries to go out to, you also want to pick the right publisher if you're going to work with a publisher, or the right user acquisition partner if you're going to work with them. Nobody's won that war yet. There are just so many different user acquisition companies out there. They all do it a little bit differently. They all have a different network. If you find the right one and negotiate the right deal with them for your game, like look at the kind of game you're making. Like at the end of the day, that's the most important thing to you all the way down the line. What kind of game are you making? Who are the customers you're trying to get to? Find that partner and convince them that you're going to bring business to them and negotiate a deal with them around that. It probably is moving to the point where that won't be possible in a while, I believe, but I think it's still possible now. The industry is still super young. I mean, I was talking to somebody and they were like, yeah, I've been doing mobile for 3 years. I'm like, you are old school. And that's true. And it's still a really young industry, and there's just a lot of opportunity, and to be creative and to look at the user acquisition partners as your partners and not as something that is unattainable by everyone. But at the end of the day, if you make a great game, it's going to be easier for you to do user acquisition, because your users are going to be less expensive for you to purchase if your game is great, and then people organically grow out of that audience that you get through user acquisition.
So yeah, just to add on, those are good points. So just to maybe even go back to one of our other topics is publishing, right? So if you're an indie game developer and you develop a great game, as Carol's saying, like if you focus on the retention and how well your game is designed, and you build, you're at the fundamental level, the game is really fun, users really like it. So then you have to think about distribution, right? Whether you can pay for it in terms of installs, or you can partner with a publisher, right? So that's where the value of the publisher comes in, where you're not really paying upfront cash, but you are partnering somebody who can maybe, who understands free to play, who understands, has the relationships with the App Store, as Nate was saying, or Apple and Google, right? So, at the fundamental core, it's building a great game, and then building a strategy around that, because we've seen a lot of examples where companies build games, they spend a lot of money, millions of dollars in paid ads, and then it totally fails because the game wasn't designed well, it wasn't fun, it was too spammy or whatever. So, and look at Supercell, right? Supercell did build great games, and from what I understand, I don't think they paid that much for user acquisition. And it just at the fundamental level was just a great game and grew organically, and then that allowed them to subsidize future paid installs and all that for going forward.